So folks, it's just about noon now. We're going to give folks a few minutes to log on and then we're going to get going, okay? For those of you who are just joining us, we're just giving it a few minutes to get a few more people logged on before we get going. So we just are very grateful for your patience. Well, folks, to be respectful of Darlene and everyone else's time, we're going to get going. Welcome to Darlene on Drugs, question and answers with Washington State Patrol toxicologist Darlene Valencia. So we have a few housekeeping matters that I'd like to get out of the way. For attending this CLE, all attorneys will get one other CLE credit with the Washington State Bar Association. Other things are that if you registered already with the CLE credit, you should have received an email this morning and given us your bar number. We will be reporting that credit on your behalf. If you didn't, you will be responsible for reporting that, and we're going to give you the activity ID at the end of the webinar. So this is a 3-part web series, and this is just the first one in the series, CNS depressants and CNS stimulants. The other 2 webinars will be, number 2 will be narcotic analgesics and cannabinoids, which is on March 7th. And also on March 21st, toxicology testing methods. So while we're going to cover a little bit about testing today and the other webinar as well, we'll do a deep dive on the 3rd one. I want to let everyone know that you don't need to take notes today. We recognize that all of you are busy and that you're probably doing this over your lunch hour on an otherwise full day. We have a handout that will cover all the information that's being covered today, so you do have a reference for later use. But now I'd like to turn your attention to Darlene. I'd like to introduce Darlene Valencia. She is a Washington State Patrol toxicologist and a fabulous human being. And here are some pictures of Darlene. Darlene, you want to tell us about some of these?
Well, when you asked me to submit a few photographs, I'm like, ooh, I usually just take a lot of photos of food. So I'm a foodie, so I had to share some of my favorites.
And so the picture in the middle, where are you? It looks like you're on a beach.
I was at Cabo on that one.
Nice. And the picture in the bottom left?
Yeah, so I also on the side do improv comedy. So that was my comedy troupe back in Nashville, Tennessee. Great group of people.
All right. Now, I've introduced you as a toxicologist, but it's my understanding that with the Washington State Patrol, your title is actually forensic scientist. Are those
Yes.
different things? Is it okay that I call you a toxicologist?
Oh, yes. So with the Washington State Patrol, everything under the crime lab or the Forensic Laboratory Science Bureau, we are forensic scientists. So that includes DNA, trace, material science, firearms, and also toxicology as well. However, saying you're a forensic scientist is a very general term. My specialty is in toxicology, so I do refer to myself as a toxicologist.
Okay, and what kind of training did you have to become a toxicologist?
Yeah, so I got my bachelor's degree in chemistry from Oregon State University, and I got a master's degree from forensic science at Pace University. And I started out my career at the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner in New York City in their forensic toxicology department. And that's when I decided that's what I wanted to do for a living.
So is this something that you would consider a passion, toxicology?
Oh, absolutely. I'm a big science nerd. So I also, when I went to college, my favorite subject was organic chemistry. And so um, drugs are organic compounds. So that's probably why I really drew to it.
And organic chemistry, that seems to be a class that sounds really difficult.
Yes, I always tell people if you ask any scientist what their least favorite course was in college, they'll probably say for organic chemistry.
And that's because it's hard.
Yes.
Okay, well, let's dive into it then. Darlene, tell us, what are drugs?
Yeah, so drugs, very simply, are substances that has a physiological effect when introduced into the body.
So when they introduce into the body, what are the process that it goes on in the human body?
Yeah, so also us as scientists, and we all speak different languages. You may have heard words like metabolites, absorption, elimination. And so where that comes from is the process of which drugs move throughout your body. And it is known as absorption, distribution, metabolism, and excretion. So with absorption, that's how it enters your body. And it can go multiple different ways. You can take it orally, like through a pill. You can smoke it. It can take it intravenously, patch, transdermal, all different ways. Those are different ways it can absorb into your body. And then from there, then it has to move throughout your body. And depending on how it was absorbed is how it will move throughout your body. Like for instance, if you take it orally, it's got to go into your stomach, into your intestines, to your liver. Whereas if something is smoked, that can immediately go into your system and into your brain. Now, the body recognizes these drugs as foreign substances and is like, I got to get rid of these. So it will change its structure, and that's metabolism. The structure in itself will change. Not entirely, and it's very dependent on what it is. Like for instance, ethanol doesn't change. There is technically a metabolite for ethanol, but it doesn't change very much. Whereas some other drugs like cocaine readily will metabolize into something else. And then excretion is how it is removed from your body, whether that could be through urine, through sweat, through breath. And so, yeah.
So we've been talking about drugs, but those of us who are lawyers that are on the Zoom, we deal in controlled substances because that's what's illegal. So what's the difference between a drug and a controlled substance?
Yeah, so a controlled substance is a drug that is just regulated by the law and specifically by the Controlled Substance Act. There are, what is it, 5 schedules, and they all range from their potential for high potential for abuse to low potential for abuse.
So we have this chart that we're showing everybody, and this includes different substances. And so ecstasy, for example, is that's a Schedule 1. And so what you're telling me is that's because it has a high potential for abuse and a low likelihood for a medical purpose. Is that fair?
That is technically, yes. And then, yeah, and then when you go down, a lot of our prescription medications will be on here, like our Xanax. And then at the bottom, looks like we have cough medicine.
All right, so let's move on and talk about CNS depressants. So what does CNS stand for?
Yeah, it stands for central nervous system. So the central nervous system is the body's major control system. which consists of the brain, spinal cord, and your nerves. And it enables your sight, hearing, smell, taste, touch, reasoning, memory, emotions. So it's very important.
So these are some CNS depressants. Can you talk us through what's on this slide?
Right. So there is actually a lot of drugs that fall under this category. A good majority of your prescription medication. So I know there's so many different classes of drugs. You've got your antidepressants, you've got sedative hypnotics, tranquilizers, and antihistamines, right? And so many of those will fall under central nervous system. So you got your benzodiazepines, that's your Xanax, your Klonopin, your Valium. Your Ambien, which I believe is zolpidem, and but your most famous central nervous system depressant is going to be ethanol or drinking alcohol.
And so will you walk us through how CNS depressants affect sensory, motor, and cognitive abilities?
Yeah, so like I said, central nervous system deals with the brain. And so what depressants are going to do, they're going to slow it down. And it's going to affect all functions of the brain, including your sensory, motor, and cognitive functions. So with sensory, that deals with your eyesight. So you could have a loss of peripheral vision, double vision, blurred vision. You could also have issues with glare recovery. So that's like at night when you have headlights, just how quickly your eyes can recover from that. With motor functions, this involves both your fine and gross motor skills. So that's like finger dexterity, slurred speech, your lack of coordination. And then cognitive is going to be that concentration, poor reasoning and judgment, altered behavior, and personality.
All right. And so let's talk about onset. How long does it take for a CNS depressant to take effect? How long does it? Go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, yeah, so onset is very dependent on what the drug is, and also how it is administered, how it's absorbed into your body. So, for instance, so like if you take it as a pill, again, it has to go through your system, has to go through into your stomach, your small intestines, whereas something that is either injected in, where you get a more immediate effect. Also, with duration. So with duration, us as toxicologists, we are usually more focused on what's known as half-lives. And that has to do with, yeah, so a half-life is going to be the time it takes for the concentration to be reduced by half. And the reasoning why is then we can know how long it can be detected in the blood. So that's why we focus on half-lives, whereas opposed to how long an actual drug will last. And what was it? And then, but also, again, our most alcohol, that one's different as opposed to your prescription medication or any other type of drug. Ethanol is different in that how it absorbs and eliminates from your body. And so we actually have an average of how long that it can take effect and how long it can be removed from your body. It could take like 45 minutes to an hour to reach your peak blood alcohol concentration. And then on average, it can be reduced by, on average, 0.015 grams per 100 milliliters an hour. But it can be as low as 0.01 to 0.025.
Say that 3 times fast.
I know, right?
All right. And then we have a chart here in terms of central nervous depressants, how it would affect certain tests that defense attorneys are likely to see, like HGN.
Yes. So this one I included from the DRE matrix. So this is what they will look for when conducting like field sobriety tests. A big one is, so with central nervous system depressants, you could see horizontal gaze nystagmus. So that's going to be your involuntary jerking of the eyes. And then if the concentration is high enough, it could be vertical gaze nystagmus. LOC is lack of convergence. So that is your inability to cross your eyes. And then they'll look at pupil size, your reaction to light. And then usually if you're doing an actual DRE evaluation, they'll take blood because sometimes this doesn't happen on the roadside, but taking
Sure.
blood pressure and pulse.
All right, so let's get into a little more depth. Let's talk
Yes.
about alcohol. So I'm using the term alcohol, but it looks like there might be more than just alcohol in this slide, or is it something else?
Yes. So this is probably where I'm going to nerd out a little bit. But when I first started in school, when I took that organic chemistry course, what really drew me in was just with small differences, you could have big changes. So alcohol is a general term, and I think it's on the next slide, but I want to say here real quick, there's a lot of different types of alcohols. In our laboratory, we look specifically for ethanol, which is your drinking alcohol, methanol, which is known as wood alcohol, and isopropanol, which is going to be your rubbing alcohol, or your hand sanitizer. Excuse me.
You were saying
Yes.
there are
So,
very small differences.
so this is what got me when I was in school. So if you look at, so on the upper left is going to be your methanol, middle is ethanol, and to the lower right is isopropyl alcohol. So the difference, so the similarities and what categorizes it as an alcohol is that OH group, which is oxygen and hydrogen. So any molecule that'll have an OH hanging off of it is deemed a alcohol. So there could be several thousands of different types of alcohols. However, these are the three that we look at. And to me, it's really cool because there's tiny, minute differences. So methanol only has one carbon, right? Ethanol, the one in the middle, the one that is in our beer or wine, that has two. And the difference between that, if you drink methanol, if you live, you will go blind. So very severe effects. There's some really great books during Prohibition era because they were they were drinking methanol instead of ethanol during that time.
I would guess that's where the phrase blind drunk comes from.
Perhaps, yes. So then again, you add another carbon to it, and you have isopropyl alcohol. Why it's called isos because the OH group is in the middle as opposed to on the end, and that's your rubbing alcohol. And to me, I found that to be very fascinating. It's what drew me in. So
And so it sounds like alcohol is sort of the umbrella term for all three of these substances. Is that fair?
yes,
All right, and then let's take a look at a alcohol lab report.
yes.
So,
So this is a
so
little
tell us
preview
about
into.
this.
Yes, so this is what you'll see on a toxicology test report. Um, And so all of we call it volatile analysis, and volatile meaning it turns from a liquid to a gas phase very quickly. So the other thing that we look for besides those three is also acetone. That's more commonly known as your nail polish remover. And if you spill some of that, you can see it just go away. That's because it's volatile. It can go easily to a gas phase. We name the technique, which we'll talk about in another part 3 probably, more specifically about what headspace gas chromatography is. And then from there, we will say exactly what we found, which is ethanol, the value, plus our measurement uncertainty. And again, that'll probably be more in depth in a later part.
So I think many of us are used to looking at Draeger breath test results. How is this different from that, or is it? So when I see
Um,
0.25 on a Draeger, I know that that's a pretty high reading. Is that the same here?
it's the same here. Yes. Sorry.
You're okay. All right, well, let's move on to some of these other drugs. So talk to me about barbiturates.
Yeah, so there are, like I said before, there's a lot of different types of CNS depressants. You're going to have your antidepressants, your Ambien, your barbiturates. Um, and so one of the reasons why I wanted to talk about CNS depressants today and CNS stimulants is it's something that we commonly see in the laboratory. But barbiturates is something that we rarely see nowadays. As And a lot of that is because barbiturates, they're usually used mainly in the hospital, but they have been mainly replaced by benzodiazepines, which is another one that is very popular that we see.
And is there a reason why they've been replaced?
Yeah, so with barbiturates, there was a very high potential for abuse and also a very high risk of overdose. Some of the most famous situations is like Marilyn Monroe, hey, and yeah, Jimi Hendrix. So they died from barbiturate overdoses, and so I want to say probably in the 70s and 80s, there was still a more of a push for benzodiazepines to replace those.
So let's talk about those since you're bringing them up.
Yes. So so these are a class of drugs. There's like I said, Klonopin, there's Valium, there's Xanax, Rohypnol, which is known as a date rape drug, is also a benzodiazepine. And again, they're a central nervous system depressant. So you can see those CNS depressant effects, even though a lot of them are used to treat anxiety, seizures, and insomnia as well. But these ones, it's a little harder to overdose on those. However, I do believe you have some slides. Yes. So the thing about these two is they died of a combined drug effect. So they also had other drugs in their system. I believe Heath Ledger had oxycodone and hydrocodone, which are opiates, in addition to the benzodiazepines. And so that creates something known as polypharmacy, and so which could lead to death. Also, real big quick side note if I got time, but when I was an intern in New York City at the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner, that was during the time when he passed away. So I got to archive his file. And as a student, I asked if I could take a look at it. And so because there were so many things that were in there, that I thought it was a really great learning opportunity for a beginner toxicologist. So that was fun.
All right. So let's talk a little bit more about benzodiazepines. There's a big list here, and I think there are 36 here.
Yes. So these are the ones that are scheduled. So 36 benzodiazepines are scheduled for and are for medical use. So what I included here was the name that we as toxicologists know. I'm really terrible actually at trade names, but the trade names is usually what you'll get written on your prescription bottle. As you can see, what really designates it as a benzodiazepine is you'll see it end in LAM or PAM. That's usually indicates that it is a benzodiazepine. However, there are actually hundreds of benzodiazepines, but only 36 of them are listed in the Controlled Substance Act.
Okay. And so the 36 of them that are listed, those are the only ones that are potentially regulated by the law as being illegal.
Or, sorry, say that one, or
these are the 36 that are regulated by the law.
Yes.
Okay. So the other ones, what are they called?
The ones. Yeah. So we have been referring to them as designer benzodiazepines. So this ended up being a really big project of mine during 2020 during lockdown. I just went on a rabbit hole and I started reading up on particularly flualprazolam. So what's really interesting about these is if you look on, I know that these are big old chemistry structures, but they look alike. On the right is alprazolam, so that's Xanax. And on the left is flualprazolam, which is a designer benzodiazepine. It's not available on the market. There's only one tiny, tiny, tiny difference, and that is that fluoride ion attached to it. And what's really, again, this kind of brings back to what I was talking earlier about methanol and ethanol, is that these tiny, tiny differences can create a lot of different changes in terms of onset, its strength, how long it lasts. So when I reached out to police officers. I asked for case files because I wanted to read just more about what was going on. Because I think a lot of people were thinking they were taking Xanax, but they were in fact taking flualprazolam, which led to a lot of stronger results or effects that they weren't anticipating. And so, and this isn't the only one. Like I said, there's hundreds. And so there's chemists out there that are just adding tiny little changes to the structure.
So it sounds like the difference between the structure on the right, which I think you said was Xanax, and the structure on the left is that the one on the left is way stronger.
I believe that one is, yes. And then was also interesting, and so this is what makes my day as a toxicologist, though, is so when we do a benzodiazepine panel, we're only looking for about 25 different benzodiazepines, and there'll be 25 that are listed on that 36. They'll be on that list. They aren't designer benzodiazepines. They're commonly prescribed drugs. So if you're taking flualprazolam, it won't show up on that designer benzodiazepine panel. But we see it in other ways. And so we had to go find it. And it was very interesting. But yeah, so that small change, and you'll get a none detected in the benzodiazepine panel.
So would it be a case where at the lab you would get a screen positive for benzodiazepine and then the confirmation test would say there isn't anything there?
Yeah, so in the past, we did screening using immunoassay. And so we were seeing a response in the immunoassay. But then when we did, but a thing with immunoassays, it won't tell you it says there's a benzodiazepine present, but it won't tell you which one. Yeah. So then we would do the panel, and then that would be negative. And then that's when we were like, interesting. So we use time of flight. And so that is able to identify it now before during the screening process.
And so time of flight is a screening test that the Washington State Patrol lab uses.
Yes, and we'll talk more about that in another part.
More to come, a little teaser. Yes. All right, well, let's move on and talk about CNS stimulants.
Excellent. Yes. So yeah.
What's on this slide?
Oh yeah. So yeah, CNS stimulants are most commonly is going to be your caffeine, which is in your coffee. Also amphetamines, that includes your ephedrine, amphetamine, methamphetamine, also pseudoephedrine, Sudafed, as well. So yeah.
And it looks like there's cocaine on there too.
Yes.
All right. And then we have a couple more celebrities to discuss. John Belushi and River Phoenix.
Yes. So with them, they took something called a speedball, which was a combination of cocaine, which is a CNS stimulant, and heroin, which was a narcotic analgesic, which would be the next part. But and so what I find to be interesting now is another fascination I have is with drug trends. So I have worked in New York. I've worked in the South in Nashville, Tennessee, as in addition to here, and just seeing how common this is in the South, like heroin use and oxycodone. And whereas up here, you'll see more methamphetamine and fentanyl. And so, now in this area in Washington State, that speedball is more of a methamphetamine and a fentanyl combination, and we rarely actually see the opiate, the heroin and the cocaine.
It sounds like what that would mean, if my deduction is correct, is that a CNS stimulant is unlikely to cause an overdose all by itself.
Oh, it can. So
Okay.
we do have a lot of cocaine overdoses,
Mhm.
um, and so and methamphetamine overdoses as well.
All right. Well, let's talk some more about the effects of CNS stimulants.
Ah, yes. So the way I like, because there are a lot of effects that are listed. When you look this up in all of my literature, it's just lots of different effects. So the way I like to discuss it is in terms of like dosages. So something that we can all relate to again is that caffeine, right? And so when you're drinking a cup of coffee, you will see that reduction in fatigue. You feel less tired. You're going to feel you have an increased alertness and focus. Um, in addition, you could have anxiety and tremors, specifically if I have that venti latte. um, um, and so, but then when you go on to methamphetamine or cocaine, um, you could see more stronger effects in that regard, where you could see rapid speech, agitation and restlessness, body tremors, exaggerated reflexes. You could see grinding of the teeth, and you could lose some of that coordination and concentration. Um, and then um, the big thing about central nervous system stimulants is that they're biphasic. And so, what I just shared with you here is the first phase. And
Sure.
then, but what comes up must come down. So, like, if you know, after you've had a cup of coffee and you feel good, after a little while, you'll start to feel tired again. Um, for people who are prescribed Adderall, you might have that crash after a while where you start to feel tired. So, that is something that will happen in that second phase is you'll start to feel fatigued again, get very drowsy. In some cases, again, if there's really high concentrations, high methamphetamine, like binge using, you may see someone lose consciousness as well.
Is that something like we would call it like on the nod?
Yes. And
Okay.
so usually we'll get mistaken for an opiate, where if it's in a driving situation.
All right. So talk to me about CNS stimulants, onset, duration, and presence of metabolites.
Yes. So again, it is very dependent on how it is administered. Like for instance, with cocaine, that can be used many different ways. It can be snorted, it could be taken intravenously, it could be smoked, and all that. You'll have different times of onset of effects and durations. Um, and then Oh, also another thing about metabolites, cocaine really likes to metabolize. It has lots of different, it changes it into a lot of different things. Um, and one of them is being, and it's a tough one to pronounce, but it is benzylecgonine. And I've had people call me to say, what is this benzodiazepine? Because they see the word benz.
Ah,
And I'm
yeah.
like, actually, it's a metabolite of cocaine. And so, but yeah, it's a tough one to pronounce. But and then you have also cocaethylene. So if there is a combination of cocaine and then drinking alcohol, uh, ethanol, of course, that will create its own metabolite, cocaethylene. It's fascinating.
All right, if you say so. Some of us are just trying to figure it out. All right. We have another chart here about what it looks like when somebody's on a CNS stimulant. Can you walk us through this?
Yes. So again, this is from the DRE matrix. So you're not going to see that horizontal gaze nystagmus or the vertical gaze nystagmus or lack of convergence, but they will notice that your pupils may be dilated. And again, if they're doing an actual DRE evaluation, they'll check their blood pressure and because it will increase your heart rate and your blood pressure.
I think we would be remiss if we didn't talk about therapeutic doses, because the drugs we've talked about today were largely things that could be prescribed.
Right.
So talk to me about therapeutic doses.
Well, yeah, so this is a common question that we get asked. And so how they come up with the therapeutic, we call it the therapeutic range, is they would take a group of people, give them a therapeutic dosage of the medication, and then test their blood to see what their concentration is, and then take an average or so, or create a range from that. The thing about therapeutic doses is they are very different depending on what paper you're relying on. And so there's two major ones that we rely on. So if you are curious about what the therapeutic range is, you may get a different answer if you call in, depending on what paper they're relying on. And that's because these studies, there's a lot of them, and the numbers are really kind of all over the place, depending on what it is, depending on how many people that they studied. And so, yeah.
And so I think you shared with us a table that's in the handout that
Did.
includes the two papers. What are the names of those two papers?
Yeah, so one of them is Winnick. That one is a popular one. And I think the other one is Schultz. The Schultz one is a therapeutic ranges of like 1100 it's a very long one. And it's available on Google. I found it on there. So I readily share it with people. And that one is really comprehensive. And what these papers, or at least the one in Schultz, is it will take all of those, like it has a whole bunch of references that it takes from different types of journal articles, literature, books, and then compiles a summary.
So the pro tip you're giving us today is that because of the variance, if possible, therapeutic, and you use the word ranges, that I think you're telling us that we should talk to our toxicologist.
Yes. Oh, yes. So we're always here to talk to, and we're happy to talk about all this and where we get our information as well. I also wanted to bring up also half-lives. I might have mentioned this before. Yeah. So again, this I believe the Schultz paper does include half-lives, but not so much the Winnick paper. But again, those range so wildly different with depending on what the drug is. I wrote just like a real quick belief. So like with cocaine, the half-life is like a half an hour to an hour. But for methamphetamine, you could see like 10 to 12 hours. In some compound, I can't remember exactly which one. Sometimes it's like 48, like or 50 hours. It's just huge. It's pretty huge. So yeah, sometimes those ranges are very, very broad, like 6 to 20 hours. And
And can I back up and ask you some questions about that?
oh yeah, absolutely.
We talk about the half-life of cocaine being half an hour to an hour. So does that mean after a half an hour has passed after I've consumed it, there's only half of what I consumed left in my system? Is that what you mean?
So what it means is it's how much is left in the blood. So again, us as toxicologists, we are more concerned about how quickly we can find it in the blood or urine, or with DUIs, we're testing blood. But in other places where I worked at, when I did clinical or workplace drug testing, we tested primarily urine or oral fluid, which is saliva. And so knowing those, how long it'll stay is important for like your windows of like detection. And as opposed to the duration of the effects, like how long the drug itself is going to last. We care mostly about how long that we can find it. And so, yeah, so with cocaine, it will come out of the blood pretty quickly. And so we will primarily see benzoylecgonine. Because usually also when it comes to like DUIs, it takes a lot of time from the time of the incident to like the blood draw, sometimes several hours passed. And so by the time we test it, we may only just see the benzoylecgonine.
Is any of this half-life impacted by the way it's consumed?
Yes. So, also, and it's very impacted by, again, what it is specifically.
The
Um,
substance itself.
yeah, there is also like my brain just immediately thought of methamphetamine. So, um, so like for instance, ethanol, some drugs will stay in what's we call it the parent drug, and then whatever it changes into is the metabolite. But some drugs really do remain unchanged and will only metabolize like a little bit. So, for instance, methamphetamine does primarily stay as methamphetamine, but it will metabolize a little bit into amphetamine, which is also a prescribed drug in itself. So you have metabolites that are active or inactive. And so, so like for instance, with heroin, it breaks down to 6-acetylmorphine. That half-life is 2 minutes, and then it will go on to morphine, which again is a
Wow.
drug all by itself.
2 minutes feels really short.
Real short. So I've only seen like heroin in its parent form once in my entire career. So that was fascinating. But so yeah, methamphetamine will metabolize a little bit into amphetamine. And then, but benzoylecgonine or cocaine really loves to metabolize. So it won't stay very long in the blood and it'll quickly metabolize. And there's so many other actually different, there's a whole chart of all the different metabolites it can turn into. But we look for benzoylecgonine, which is the most common one.
Okay. So I think next we actually have a drug positive report.
Yes.
If you could walk us through this.
Yes. So this will be below the volatile analysis, so separate. We will show, we have the ST number, which is our state toxicology number, and then we will get 2 tubes for a DUI investigation. So we'll tell you exactly which tube we tested it from. So A tube, and then what technique we used. So in the beginning, we were testing for cannabinoids. That's a screen by itself, where we use liquid chromatography, tandem mass spectrometry.
That's the first one on here, the first one right under, it's this one right here.
Yes.
Okay.
And then we go on to our comprehensive drug screen. So that's going to be that time of flight. That's the one that it's very specific. It can tell you exactly what's in there. It is qualitative. It is a screening. So we only say positive only, or we don't give an amount, because it's known as presumptive positive. So because what it's measuring is its exact mass, and so there could be other drugs that have the same exact mass. So we have to confirm it in order to report it. And so the liquid chromatography tandem mass spectrometry technique that's used for amphetamines, that one is specifically looking for methamphetamine, amphetamine, and then we can give you a value on that one.
Okay. Can I back up and ask some questions?
Oh, absolutely.
So you were talking about this second one in this list, the time of flight, as being a screening test.
Yes.
And so will you break that down a little bit for us? So what's another way to put that? What does a screening test do?
Yeah. So real quick, in order for us to report anything, we have to test it twice, preferably using 2 different methods. A screening is really just a very easy way to tell us what is in there. So again, in the past, immunoassay was used. And other places where I worked at, immunoassay is a really good technique because it'll tell you which class of drug is in there. So it gives you a good idea of what you need to focus on, instead of having to do every single test and seeing. So this one narrows it down that there are amphetamines present. So then we can then target that by doing the confirmation test.
Okay, and that confirmation test is the tandem mass spectrometry. Am I saying that right?
Yes.
Okay. And then I noticed there are actual amounts here, and this one only says positive.
Yes.
Tell me about that.
Yeah. For our screening, we only do qualitative only, meaning positive or negative. And then for our confirmation tests, we are going to do we're going to construct what's known as a calibration curve. And I'll probably go into more detail in another part, where we'll use multiple different calibrators. I think specifically for amphetamines, it's 5. For THC, it's 7. So, so that we can give a more accurate amount. The time of flight will give you an estimated amount, and we use that to compare the results of the confirmation test. And so, but in terms of reporting, we'll just report qualitative.
I noticed there's an amount on here, but it doesn't look like in the ethanol test positive report that there's a margin of error listed. Is there a reason for that?
Yes. So right now we are only reporting measurement uncertainty for ethanol and THC. And that's because of the per se laws in the state of Washington. But we do have on our website a calculation of all measurement uncertainties for every drug that we test for. But we don't put them on the report. Oh, what was the other part I wanted? Yes. So there's
I could
something
ask
else.
you another question,
There were,
unless it comes to you. All right, I'll ask you another question. Maybe I'll trigger what you were trying to get out as
I hope
well.
so.
So there are concentrations of methamphetamine on here and amphetamine. Can you
Yes.
tell if somebody's impaired just based on these numbers?
I also remembered what I was going to say too.
Okay, start there then.
Sorry. The units. So this can also get really complicated when reading a report because there'll be different units. Ethanol is going to be in grams per 100 milliliters. You'll see on drugs, you'll see nanograms per milliliter or milligrams per liter. And these are all different units, kind of like saying feet to yards. I remember when I first started, I was in Nashville, Tennessee, and I got my very first call from a lawyer. I was very nervous. And she was a lady who was based out of Texas, so she had a very thick Southern drawl. And her first question was she had gotten a report from us and then a report from her state laboratory. And our numbers were much, much bigger than the numbers that were on the state report. And that was because we reported in nanograms per milliliter, and then they reported in milligrams per liter. And so it's a difference by 1,000. In nanograms per liter, that amphetamine is a 16, and the methamphetamine is a 61. And so
huge differences.
Huge difference. So it's all in terms of units. Also, and to answer that other question that you had.
And why did I repeat the question since we've come this far?
Yes.
Looking at these amounts, can you actually tell if somebody's impaired by those substances?
So we cannot. So the level of concentration of the drug doesn't equal the level of impairment. And a lot of that has to do with the person's tolerance. Like I don't know the person and their experience with it. And then also because, again, with a lot of those studies that they have done on the effects of, the concentrations of drugs in compared to like what they see in driving, they can only give it's unethical to give a very large concentration of methamphetamine and then tell them go drive a car, right? A lot of those give them a very, very tiny dose. And so, like I said before, with that cup of coffee, if you're giving them a small dose, well, you're actually going to see, increased focus and alertness. With that, there's not a lot of data out there for really high concentrations. And also, there's multiple reasons why we can't tell. But as opposed to ethanol, they have when they eliminate, it's known as zero order kinetics. It goes straight up and down. You'll reach your peak and then it goes down. But for drugs, it doesn't do that. It will go up, reach its peak, and then it'll start to go down, but then plateau. So again, we don't know where
You
that
don't know
person is.
where a person is in
Right.
that plateau.
So those are all different reasons. And so so I am not comfortable saying anything about level of impairment when I look at concentration.
Okay. We did get a question in. Darlene, do you have access to the question and answer?
I believe so.
Because
See.
I would suggest maybe you should read it out loud before you answer it. Do you see it?
Ooh, yes. Sorry.
It looks like a question that's right up your alley.
I know. Sorry. Kratom. This is again. I'm always fascinated by some of these. That's metrogenine. Yes. So, are you able to speak about kratom and the related compounds, metrogenine and 7-hydroxymetrogenine? I understand this plant and related compounds behave like both a CNS stimulant as well as a depressant. Is this correct? Do the effects vary by dosage? Is kratom basically a plant-based speedball? Also, though it may be more appropriate for the third part of your presentation. Yes, that is actually, so that is something that we used to test for, but we no longer do. And it is something that we actually rarely we're seeing in terms of like DUI cases. I'm not sure. It's been a while since I've been doing death investigations. Washington State does both all of the death investigations and DUI investigations for the state of Washington. I moved over into federal way, so now I am just doing DUI testing, so I don't know the numbers or the trends in relation to death investigations. So because of that, I haven't seen it in a very, very long time. So it's not something I'm familiar as to the effects of because we aren't. But kratom, that's kind of the common name. So what the drug is metrogenine, and 7-hydroxy is its metabolite.
So is it a CNS stimulant or depressant or both?
That's something I'd have to look up. So
okay.
I hope that person will reach out to me because then I can give them all kinds of papers.
Well, and because we have more in our series, we can also answer this question at the next installment.
In fact, I do. I may actually include it in the next narcotic analgesic because I believe that's when a lot of people were using it in relation to getting off of opioid addiction, if I'm not mistaken. And so I'll probably include it on that part.
All right. Well, does anybody else have any other questions? Because the Q&A is open. All right, Darlene, do you want to repeat that question?
Oh, yeah. Is there one test that is more accurate than another? Out of blood test, hair follicle, UA, or mouth swab? Ooh. So, as like I said, I worked in Nashville, Tennessee for a while. I worked for a private corporation where I worked in all different areas. I did a lot of urine drug testing. And then there's me. I have my own like personal, what do you call it? Opinions. I have done very little to no hair testing, and I've always been a little bit suspect of that in terms of the way it's done or the way I've seen it be done. And that is something that I saw. We didn't do that in Nashville, but the thing about urine is that, again, it's a way that it is eliminated from your body, right? So when you get so you'll see much, much, much more higher concentrations, right? And some people will think, oh, wow, that is a lot, right? But in actuality, that's the drug out of your system. It's it's so you will see larger amounts, but that doesn't, again, equate at all as to how much you actually took. It's just how much is exited your body. So, and again, when I hear the word accurate, I think of the words, think of how of our testing, right? For instance, Immunoassay is only going to look for certain classes of drugs, right? It's not specific, and it's not telling you how much is in there. It's just telling you it's there, possibly, maybe, because there's a lot of cross reactivity with immunoassay. But then we have now time of flight, or we have, which is much more specific. However, and again, there's multiple drugs that could have the same exact weight. So, but when we come into our mass spectrometry and our chromatography, that's going to be much more specific and much more accurate in terms of testing. All that is used in testing for hair and blood and urine, and with oral with mouth swabs. So I hope that answers your question, because
So it sounds like some of those tests we would probably put in a category of a screening test rather than a confirmation test. Is that a fair way to kind of dissect them?
right. Like, again, for instance, like, again, in my past with workplace drug testing, a lot of companies will report a value. And again, that could make you think, oh, wow, that's a really high value. They must have, taken a lot of whatever it was, but not necessarily, because it is just there to say that it was taken at one point in time. Um, um, I'm thinking of tangents. I can go off on a tangent and talk a lot because I'm thinking about this
I think
one
we
time we
all
had
appreciate you nerding out.
I know, because I'm thinking about the time someone ate a poppy seed muffin and it came up positive for morphine. So
I
it
think
was,
many of us attorneys have been told that by clients.
yes.
All right. Well,
Uh,
should we wrap it up then, or
sure. I hope, is there any other?
we can start going through the takeaways, and if folks have other things they want to ask, the Q&A is open. So the takeaways from today, Darlene: CNS depressants include alcohol, Ambien, barbiturates, benzodiazepines, which is like Valium and Klonopin, and slow down the body systems. CNS stimulants include caffeine, nicotine, amphetamine, methamphetamine, cocaine, and speed up the body systems and can result in a crash because they're biphasic. Therapeutic doses, and what it should say is ranges, vary based on different articles, and that everyone is encouraged to contact the toxicologist on their case and talk to them directly. You've said that toxicologists can't equate the level of impairment with the concentration of a substance. And again, just one more plug, talk to your Washington State Patrol toxicologist in your case. They're scientists, and it sounds like you all are encouraged to talk to people about the cases that you review. Is that fair?
Oh, yes. Excellent.
All right. Well, folks, we have about 2 minutes left, so we'll just thank you all very much for coming. You will get an email after this that will have the handout attachment. You will also get a link to where you can download that attachment and also get other resources. But please also consider signing up for parts 2 and 3. And at this point, I just want to thank Darlene for being willing to educate defenders about controlled substances, because we are definitely not scientists, but we do need the help. Thank you, Darlene.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Thank you.
All right. Hope everyone has a great day.